welcome to episode 4 of season 2 of From the Yarra River to the Mediterranean Sea. This episode was part of a series called 2020 Torah, established by Tamra Aviva Wright from the UK. Like, I guess, a growing number of conversations that I have these days, it's part interview, part therapy. And I'm uploading it because I hope that some people find this meaningful. It took place on Zoom and begins with the moderator, Dr Lindsay Simmonds, asking me a question about something I wrote on page 162 of the book. And thanks to everyone for listening.
As a peace activist in Jerusalem, I will continue to hold the stories, the pain, the hopes and dreams of all my Jewish, Christian, and Muslim friends together at this time, letting them wrestle within my heart, finding a place to hear and empathize with them all. So I certainly felt, Ittay, that was really, you can't say the whole book in a paragraph, but I certainly felt that when I read that piece. Can you tell me just something about that, as it were, autobiographic moment?
I know maybe it sounds naive, but I always see people as people before I see them as their labels, and that is a theme that runs throughout the book. I live in a city in Jerusalem where as soon as you walk past the street, within 3 seconds, you look at someone and you look at the clothing they're wearing and whether or not they have a beard or their head covering or lack of head covering or whether their shoulders are, and within 3 seconds, you've made a judgment on their political view, their religious view, their heritage, where they were born. It's very, very obvious. And 90% of the time you're actually right as well, because a lot of times those external appearances do actually match people's religious and political views. And I guess because I grew up in a country like Australia where we don't do that, that's how I operate. I think it's why I work in a peace organisation, to try and see people as people first, and then obviously those labels are very important, but not to see them as the first thing when I encounter them.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. That resonates very deeply with me, both in terms of the way in which I look out onto the world and also the unfortunate assumptions that we make and the biases that we have that sometimes are more predictable than we'd like them to be.
Yes.
More prescriptive than descriptive, which causes me some discomfort. And it's quite a good segue, actually, because the first theme that I wanted to talk about was this concept of discomfort, actually. There's certainly something about being at this time in history, perhaps more than ever for me in my lifetime, in a space where both interfaith and peacebuilding work has caused incredible discomfort. And you write, right at the beginning of the book, actually, that you wrote the book, and I quote, to comfort the troubled and trouble the comfortable. And I really like that. I really feel that concept of being uncomfortable or generating discomfort might be the most important way of transforming the way each of us think. I think we all assume we're more self-aware than we are. And I also think that there's nothing about us intellectually, academically, socially, psychologically that will change unless we are caused some discomfort. I just really wanted you to talk about that, actually, that why that led you to sort of write this book and what you think it is about uncomfortableness that makes it such an anchor to the work that you do.
Yeah. So, please God, I'll live a very long life. But when I die, that's the line I want written on my tombstone. And the reason I came to believe that is when I was, before I worked at Kids for Peace, I was a high school teacher for 15 years. And in my first year, I was a terrible high school teacher because I was teaching 14-year-olds Tanakh and the Jewish way in death and mourning, and they weren't particularly interested in learning how to say Kaddish in Aramaic. And I had no end of discipline problems trying to teach that class in Australia. And often I was trying to make the kids comfortable, and I would try and accommodate all of their needs and change the lesson, and whatever I did, it just didn't work. And then And then I switched to being a teacher that tried to make them uncomfortable all the time. And I yelled at them and I punished them and I called their parents and I called the principal and I tried every possible discipline to make them care about my Jewish studies lesson. And then that didn't work either. And then I could have just stopped teaching after my first year of teaching, which is what about 50% of teachers do. But I stayed in the profession, and then I learned that to be a good teacher, you need to find the sweet spot between comforting the trouble and trouble the comfortable. And what I mean by that is a student can't learn if they don't feel safe. So firstly, they have to feel comfortable with you, with the class, that they have to feel that they can be seen and they can be heard and that there's a voice for every student in the class. But also, if the content doesn't trouble them, if you're not challenging them, if you're not having their peers challenging them, if you're not creating an environment for, I'd say, robust dialogue as you do to have to learn Jewish studies, you're not learning anything. I'm not Wikipedia. I'm not here to give them a list of all the kings of the Tanakh or a timeline of King David's family or all those things that you want people to memorize. I want them to be challenged by the many ethical dilemmas that that exist in our tradition. And so that was pretty much my philosophy in teaching. Can everyone just mute themselves, by the way? Someone's not muted.
Hi, can we, I'll just, the person called Bernard on the screen, would you please mute yourself? Thanks so much. Keep going, Ittay.
Yeah, so I think that's what good education is, and I think even more so when I wrote this book. Obviously, I know the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians don't agree with me, and so I could have written it in a way that just made everyone upset, and I could have been very provocative, but I really tried to write it thinking, who is the Palestinian and who is the Israeli that most disagrees with me, and then to write it in a way that they can read it. So I didn't want to alienate those readers. I wanted to, in a way, put in all of their arguments as well, and then explain why I see the world differently, but not disregard those arguments, because there's often a view that is very widely held that people that have extreme political views are insane. You see it a lot on social media. That person believes in a two-state solution. They're mad. That person's a Zionist. They're crazy. That person thinks Israel's committing a genocide. That's so insane. Whatever the statement is. And what I actually find is that most people that don't believe what I believe, they're not insane. They don't have a mental illness. They're not crazy. They just had a different life experience to me. And because of their life experience and because of trauma they suffered or their experience with Palestinian terrorism or with an Israeli police officer or with occupation or with a checkpoint, because of their life experience, they don't share the view that I do. And if I had had their life experience, it's very likely that I would probably believe what they believe. And so a lot of the way I think about the world is not that I agree with everyone. I don't agree with a lot of people, but I understand that people that don't see the world as I do are just as intelligent and just as rational as I am, but they've had different life experiences. If I want to share Jerusalem with them, I need to understand what those life experiences are that have led them to have the views that I maybe don't hold.
Okay, that is brilliantly helpful, actually. And I'm trying to decide now. I have two trajectories in my head. The one is I want to hear more about Kids for Peace, on the one hand, but on the other hand, I want to think a bit further about this uncomfortableness, because in another place in the book, and I'm just going to read another quote for those of you who have it. It's pages 66 to 67. And maybe when I've read it, you can think about this discomfort idea for you as now heading this program and thinking about what that discomfort actually generated in you. Not only a difference in the teaching, that idea of comfort and discomfort you've explained actually rather brilliantly, if I may say, in the classroom, that tension between safety and security and being pushed into new ideas. But I'm also thinking about your internal discomfort and what it's made you do. I'm going to read this quote. As someone who is deeply grateful that a Jewish state exists, but is deeply saddened by the fact that it came at the expense of the Palestinian people, all this talk of demographics, which is still so much a part of the Israeli discourse to this day, makes me very uncomfortable. And that was just one example of, you're talking about the demographics and where people sit politically, socially, and so on. But this idea of you feeling uncomfortable, not making your students feel uncomfortable, how has that changed your life and what you decided to do with it?
Yeah, so one of the first things I did when I first moved to Jerusalem from Australia in 2018 was I joined a secular Haredi dialogue group. And for those that aren't familiar, ultra-Orthodox or Haredi Jews make up a third of Jerusalem, and a third of the Jewish population in Jerusalem, about 20% of the total population. And it was in 2018, there was the municipal election, and all of the ads were demographic ads. So basically the Haredi candidate was like, vote for me and I'll make Jerusalem more Haredi. The Zionist secular candidate was, vote for me and I'll make Jerusalem more secular Zionist. The Masorti was, vote for me and I'll make Jerusalem more like me. And then the Palestinians, who were 40% of the city, didn't run a candidate at all. And it was interesting because, usually in politics, the differences between the different political parties are about taxation, about immigration, about services. And I was living in Jerusalem. It was my first election voting in a municipal election, and the entire vote was based on demography. Like, there was no political issue other than I want my sector of the population to be more represented on council. And there was no policies. No party had any policy other than I'm Haredi, so you know what I believe. Like, I don't need to give you a policy. And again, I understand Jerusalem is a very city. It's very divided on demography. Neighborhoods are divided on demography. So I understand, why our elections are based on demography, but it kind of it didn't sit with me because I again, and it goes back to my first answer, I want to see people as people. And I think one of the things that happened when I went to this secular Haredi dialogue group for 6 months, we sat with 7 secular Jews and 7 Haredi Jews, and we talked about everything, LGBT rights and serving in the army and the Palestinians and holy places and Shabbat and Kashrut and all of these topics. I didn't agree with a lot of what the Haredi people, said in the group, but I could see that they feel like a persecuted minority in the city. And then I was like, but I feel like a persecuted minority because I'm secular. And the Palestinians definitely feel like a persecuted minority, and they're actually the majority in terms of demographics as well. So it's weird because I live in a city that there's no majority, and every group acts like they're the majority, but feels like a persecuted minority. And so demographics then becomes a huge talking point in the city. And when you talk about the future of the city, about what do people want, they often first, again, instead of saying, I want the city to have a flourishing business or, better public, they talk about more of this group or more of that group. And something I find very, very troubling, because I think what will make Jerusalem a flourishing city is not more Haredim or more Palestinians or more secular Jews or more Zionists or more anti-Zionists or whatever it is. It will make it more people that want Jerusalem to be a home for everyone.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, of course. Well, to me, I don't know how other people feel. I should have said that as we go along, please write down questions and we will have a Q&A at the end of this conversation. And that really does lead me very neatly into this question of narratives. I mean, demography and its kind of parallel track of narratives where each person, either feeling like a persecuted or just a minority, has a set of its own narratives, and the way in which it looks out onto the world and the way it feels about the world and the way it engages in the world. And I was thinking, Tamra, after you introduced also Julie, I remember her saying recently at a memorial interfaith event that why shouldn't she feel everybody's pain? Why is she held to account for feeling everybody's pain? And you wrote, Ittay, it's okay to be heartbroken for more than one group of people at the same time. Now, I know that's not your quote and you're taking it from a graffiti, actually, some graffiti on a wall, but it's been sort of posted and I don't want to say misappropriated, but appropriated rather beautifully in many places. And I'm just thinking about that concept of all human beings being of equal value and equal worth and how that works both in your city of Jerusalem, but also in this politics of peace building.
Yeah, there's another quote that a lot of my friends who are peace builders actually have on their Facebook profiles, which is from Leo Tolstoy, and he says, "If you feel your own pain, you're alive. If you feel other people's pain, you're a human being." And it's something, you know, everyone feels their own pain, and everyone feels the pain of their tribe or their people. So, you know, I don't know a Jew alive that doesn't feel pain about October 7th. I don't know a Palestinian alive that doesn't feel pain about the immense devastation, destruction happening in Gaza as we speak. And it's very natural to feel your own pain first. But I think humans, maybe in a way that distinguishes us from animals, is that we have a capacity. It's not an innate capacity, it's a learned capacity, but we have a capacity to feel pain for other people, pain for people we don't know, pain for people not of our tribe or our nation, even people on the other side of the world. And that's something you need to learn, because it's not as innate as feeling your own pain, but empathy is an essential ingredient to building peace. And to do that, you need to humanize people. And throughout this war since October 7th, there's been immense amounts of dehumanization on social media of Jews, of Palestinians, especially of Gazans, and in the Israeli media, and all of that contributes to people not feeling the pain of the other, and that is something I don't want to see happening anymore, because before you get into any sort of political discussion about peace, whether you support a two-state solution or one state or any of those other solutions, you have to feel pain and you have to believe that people can change. You know, when I was speaking to you this morning, we spoke about the story of Yonah and the city of Nineveh. Do you want to maybe tell that story?
Sure. So I'll just let everyone know that we were talking about just a piece that I've been thinking about and lecturing on recently and adding to because of the situation in Israel and Gaza, about the concept of holding power to account, about religious leaders especially speaking out against a multitude of sins, as it were. But one of the interesting the ideas about that is, to some extent, that's not necessarily about the consequences of that speaking out. And one of the issues of the book of Jonah, is that his reluctance to go and speak to the people of Nineveh was about the consequences. He doesn't want to go and speak to them because he's afraid, or almost irritated, I think, by God's capacity for compassion. And he's afraid. He doesn't want the people to do tshuva, to repent, because he knows they'll be saved. And he's somehow irritated by that concept. Now, in the end, of course, there's a whole construct of convoluted story, the whale and so on, each to their own on the interpretation of those things. But he is made to go. And indeed, the consequences are that people do repent. And they do listen to what he has to say, and they do want to make a better world, as it were. And to some extent, that frustrates him. Ittay, do you want to go on and comment on that?
So, I mean, when I talk about reactions, I get to my book. When I speak to Palestinians, one of the most common reactions is the Jews can't change. The Jews or Israel, you're always going to want all Palestinian land to yourself. You're always going to want to expel us and occupy us and put us behind walls and checkpoints, and nothing we do will ever make you change. And then Jews say to me, the Palestinians can't change because of Islam and because of the Quran, and they're always going to want to rape and burn and kill us and do more October 7th. And And when you have the belief that the other side can't change, like Yonah and Nineveh, then peace becomes impossible. So one of the foundations of peace building is actually believing that an individual at first can change, and a family can change, and a community can change, and a city can change, and eventually a whole nation can change. And I'm not just making this up, because every country in the world that's gone from a state of conflict to a state of peace has had a radical transform. We've seen it in Northern Ireland, in South Africa, and Rwanda, sort of across Europe after World War II. No countries transition from war to peace without those countries sometimes changing their names, their constitutions, their flags, but people can change. And I think and that's why I guess I'm the opposite of Yonah, because I will speak to everyone, because I do have that belief, and that empowers and, animates all the work that I do.
Mm. And maybe it's a good time now to talk about the work. Do you want to now talk about Kids for Peace a little bit? Let us know what that is more in detail.
Yeah. Yes, I'm just going to share my screen, because I know there's visual learners in the room, so I like to have pictures sometimes. So this was my first ever Kids for Peace program that I facilitated in 2018. It's in a neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem, and half of the room is Palestinian. There's about a third who are Jewish, and there's a couple of Christians there as well. And we were talking about what Jerusalem means to us, and the kids were all introducing themselves. And since then, it's been 7 years that I've been working Kids for Peace. This was our staff meeting at the start of this year in my living room. It's a wonderful team of ladies that I work with, who are all brilliant in their own way. And together we run regular dialogue groups that bring teenagers who would otherwise never meet one another to Kids for Peace. For those that aren't familiar, in Jerusalem we don't have mixed schools. So Haredim go to one school, religious Zionist kids go to one school, secular Zionist kids go to a different school. Palestinian Christians and Muslims also have their own school. So there isn't a public school system. So this, for example, is an iftar meal that we did in our Sheikh Jarrah office during Ramadan, where we got everyone to experience what happens in an iftar meal. And we also did an event for Christmas and for Hanukkah and for Pesach. So all of the kids get to know one another's faiths, traditions. We learn each other's songs, music, religious texts. We do Kahoot quizzes. We also have a parents program as well, where the parents do a similar dialogue to what the children are doing, because we also believe that you can't just work on the kids without giving the parents an opportunity to have this experience too. And overall, it's very meaningful. This was our first program this year, where 72 children joined, and I wish every child in Jerusalem could have this experience. But for me, I feel like this is a place to start in building the reality that I want to see in this city, and that's why I do this work.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for sharing those. Actually, I was also thinking, when you're talking about different narratives and giving people the space, both secure and safe, and causing them some discomfort, to particularly think about their relationship with the land. I mean, we talk about the relationship between the historical / biblical relationship between Jews and Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, as compared with the state of Israel. Then we talk about the concept of safety and security when it comes to the state of Israel, and the Palestinian narrative, which you write actually quite a lot about in the book. And I learned a lot, just to say, about Palestinian history, so thank you for that. I wonder if you can just say something about enabling conversations that don't only talk about people's sort of life, fears, experience, but their attachment to the land itself.
So there's a big debate, I guess, in this land about who is indigenous, who was here first. And I'm not going to give a whole history lesson on that topic, but I'll say that it's very clear from speaking to people for more than 5 minutes, that most Jews feel that they rightly have a connection here that goes back thousands of years, and Palestinians also feel the same way. And there's various ways to read the other's history that minimizes or diminishes their connection to this land, and to claim that they were immigrants or they came from somewhere else or they converted, or the connection is based on colonial powers, etc. And all of those readings, you can find academic merit for each one of them, but ultimately, like even when you look at sort of national symbols that Israelis and Palestinians use to talk about this, so let's say the olive tree. The olive tree is very, very few Palestinian artworks that don't have an olive tree, and you'll find that a lot of Jews, when they draw this land, they also draw olive trees because we live in a land that has a lot of olive trees, and we have that same rivalry over food, and images of Jerusalem and the old city walls, and all of those sorts of things as well. And I give the history because I think it's important to understand, but I also know that no one's ever changed their mind from giving them a history lesson, because people hold the view they hold because of the way they were raised and their life experiences. And so,
can I jump in a minute?
Yeah.
Just to say, I'm interested in particular, I didn't say this clearly, I think, in the facilitation process, how that, like you said, you've just kind of concretized that idea that people come from their own education, their own families, blah, blah, blah. So how does that facilitation work in the recognition, the awareness, the acknowledgement of an other's, I don't want to say claim, because that, again, has that conflictual, sense to it, but that their feelings towards, their emotional feelings towards, their historical connection with the land?
Okay, so I don't know if this is a question you're asking, but I'll just share a thought about facilitating dialogue, which is, when children are in school, most schools teach debating. And when you learn debating, you learn about how to win an argument. Now, what are the keys to having a good debate? You have to be confident. You have to rebut everyone's argument. You have to believe you're right even when you're wrong. You have to be a little bit arrogant, cocky, funny, and then you've got Oxford debating clubs, and a lot of those people end up in Parliament and they do the same thing. And people vote for them, I guess, if they do that well. What schools very rarely teach is dialogue. Now, when you do dialogue, it's like the opposite of debate. So in dialogue, you can concede points when you're wrong. In dialogue, you listen more than you speak. In dialogue, you show empathy. In dialogue, maybe it's not equal speaking time between the two sides. So it's the exact opposite of a debate. And so I feel like a lot of what I'm trying to do before I get into Israel-Palestine history is I'm trying to teach the kids the skills of dialogue, which again are maybe what I'm saying to you comes obvious to you, but it's really not obvious to a lot of children, especially in Jerusalem. And so by teaching, those skills of dialogue, then we don't start with the heaviest question of who does Jerusalem belong to, or the status of Al-Aqsa or Gaza, or those sorts of things. One of the first activities I do with the kids is we have a debate where the question is TikTok better than Instagram? Now, that is actually not a question that actually matters, but the kids have very, very strong opinions about it. So it's actually a very good thing to debate with children. And they get very fired up about one app or the other, depending on which they like best. And then after it often turns into a screaming match, I give them different rules of like, now we're going to debate TikTok versus Instagram with certain guidelines, i.e. you have to show empathy, you bring in a talking stick, you have to repeat what someone says before you rebut, you have to listen, all of these things that I guess we as adults know. And I think that enables
I'll just say the talking
dialogue.
stick means that people have a particular amount of time to say what
exactly.
they have.
Yeah.
Okay, that's exactly the question I was asking, so thank you. Yeah, that's exactly the question. And again, weirdly enough, leads me very much to my personal interest, which is women and peacebuilding, and the difference between angry, arrogant, competitive debate as to compassionate, active listening and debate, but with certain parameters that are perhaps underestimated, especially when it comes to peace building. I'm going to shift slightly, and I'd like to talk very much about women and peace building specifically. And in your chapter on page 187, for those of you who've got this, you bring a poem written by Rachel Goldberg Polin, Hirsch's mum, that she read on, let's have a look, day 184 of the Israel-Hamas war. She shared this poem, and I'm going to read it, and then we'll think about its impact and perhaps what it was she was saying. It was at, I'll just put this in a context. It was read at the rally in New York, opposite the headquarters of the United Nations. Okay, and I quote: "To the boys in the room, there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent civilians suffering terribly in Gaza, but I only know one of them. He and I share the same DNA, and we are both left-handed. Oh, now only one of us is left-handed. And he lived and grew inside of me for 9 months many moons ago. To the boys in the room, every folktale begins with the 4 words, once upon a time, and every deal or negotiation that you think of crafting should begin with 1 word, hostages. To the boys in the room, to motivate and incentivize you, you will now be asked to hand over one of your family members, your spouse, your father, your sister, your son, your brother, your daughter, your mother, your grandfather. If he has already passed on to the next world, we will supply you with a shovel. We will then hold on to your beloved one and treat them exactly as our beloved have been treated until you come up with a plan for how to get these people back. And I reckon it will take you less than 184 days. To the boys in the room, our Father who art in heaven, call him by any other name you wish. He will be home soon, and boys, just you wait till your father gets home." I have much to say about that poem. It's actually very hard to read without weeping. Can you maybe share with us why you put that in here and what it is about it that you feel is so impactful in terms of both peace building and in terms of where women sit within the peace building landscape?
Yeah, so I put that poem in with the permission of Rachel, who lives in the same neighborhood as me in Jerusalem. And I think of all the hostage stories that I connected to most, I connected to Hirsch the most, I think, because we have similar biographies. You know, we both live in Jerusalem in the same neighborhood. The Anglo community here is very small. He was also involved in and believed in peace building as well. And I know many people that knew him, even though I didn't know him personally. And I think when Rachel advocates for Hirsch, she does 2 things that I see that I guess that are quite rare from hostage families. I'm not saying this to judge the other hostage families, because each type of advocacy is obviously their choice. But I think the first thing is, and it's very clear in all of her speeches, is that she always humanizes Palestinian suffering and Israeli suffering. She doesn't turn a blind eye to that. And if she did turn a blind eye to it, I wouldn't judge her. I can understand why a child that's had a parent that's had their child kidnapped would not, want to see Palestinian suffering at all. So I totally understand why that's legitimate, but she does. And the other thing that she does in this poem is she calls out the elephant in the room, which is that all of the negotiations for the last 670 days between Israel and Hamas have only been conducted by men. And she wonders what would happen if those negotiations were conducted by mothers with children whose children are hostages in Gaza, and mothers from Gaza whose children are facing Israeli bombardment and starvation. And when she says it would take you a lot less than 186 days, she's right. Because I think one of the problems is that a lot of the negotiations are being conducted by people who are looking at political, strategic, security goals, but they've kind of forgotten the human impact of what is happening here. And if the human impact was the primary issue in these negotiations, I imagine this horror would have been over a long ago. That's not to say that all women straight away are going to compromise. Obviously, there's women cannot compromise just as much as men can't. But when I looked at the research on this, I found that from the 1990s there was a research study of 40 conflicts around the world, and they found that in the conflicts where women were either involved in the peace negotiations or the implementation of the peace agreement, there was roughly a 30 to 40% higher chance of the peace agreement lasting from negotiations where women weren't involved. Also, when we look at our own conflict, in Oslo, there were no women involved. There was also no people of faith involved. In contrast, in Northern Ireland, there's the famous story. I also put it in the book of Betty Williams and Mairead Corrigan, after a car accident in 1976 where an IRA member killed several people who were in Corrigan's family, and they started this group called the Community of Peace People. And within a year, the number of people that wanted the Troubles to end. Now, the Troubles didn't end that year. It took the Troubles another 20 years before they reached to the Good Friday Agreement. But that women's peace movement was the seed that started something that changed the future of Northern Ireland. So, and I know we have organizations in this country like the Palestinian organization Women of the Sun and the Jewish organization Women Wage Peace. And I think it's essential that those groups are just as involved in peace, security, dialogue as are, the many groups representing the interests of men.
It's interesting, actually, because even the groups that are not ostensibly women, like Women Wage Peace, like the Parent Circle, also headed by a woman. I mean, Huda Abu Akrab was at the time, last years ago, head of All Met. So there are quite a lot of women involved, even in those ostensibly kind of male leadership roles. I was also thinking, actually, of, I don't want to go deep into why, because as you said, there's a whole spectrum of women in the world and men in the world, and I'm not here to be as prescriptive as perhaps I'd like to be. Sometimes I'm more ranty than I'll be today. But I think that you also bring a quote from Linda Gradstein, who also just visited your homeland, Australia, Philemon. And she said something about the story of Hind Rajat that you quote, the young Palestinian girl who died after leaving a long message, and the ambulance couldn't get to her. The ambulance drivers were themselves killed on the way to trying to save her. But she said the following. She said, "We are responsible for this, the authors of something horrible." And I was just thinking about that ability, again, to name something, to say, I'm sorry, to take responsibility. And whether you think that's, that's one of the major problems in general in peace building, is this kind of not inability, but this unwillingness, this very slow, it slowly comes out that there's responsibility, and how we manage that. Yeah.
So something I think about a lot in the book and also in my personal life is, what's this place going to look like when there's peace? And it's so hard to imagine, because we are the furthest away from peace right now than we've ever been in my lifetime. And when I think of what my government wants to do in the next 2 weeks to Gaza, and it's just, my mind can't fathom it. And so I know it's going to sound strange to talk about peace, but when I was writing the book, I kind of looked at other countries that had gone through this. And I know this isn't in the book, but I spend a lot of time researching the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, which is a place I'm actually visiting next week. And in South Africa, they didn't punish the people who were involved in the crimes of apartheid. They had a commission whereby you sort of came and you had to, in a way, like make a confession before the person that you had wronged, and you had to tell the truth. And that was it. You weren't then, in some cases they were punished, but in most cases they weren't punished. And I feel like most Israelis and Palestinians, when there's peace and they look at all the crimes that have been committed in Gaza and in Israel on October 7th, I don't think truth will be enough. I think a lot of people will want people who have committed crimes to go to jail or to be executed even. And one of the reasons why, when apartheid ended, why South Africa didn't turn into a bloodbath was because they had a leader like Mandela that was able, despite him having every reason in the world to want revenge against the whites. He famously wears a Springbok jersey, in the 1995 World Cup, and he speaks a language of reconciliation and of forgiveness that enables South Africa to not fall into horrific violence after 1994. And you can look at other examples in Rwanda, the Gattaca after the Tutsi genocide. And so I think I think our Truth and Reconciliation Commission is a very, very long way away. But I think again, no matter what political solution we have here, and most countries obviously favor a two-state solution, but even if it's that, I think in addition to that, there has to be a grassroots reconciliation process that has to involve truth, has to involve justice, and has to involve empathy. And those three ingredients are immensely in short supply right now.
All right, so let's think. I want to give people time to ask you questions. It's such a great opportunity to have you here. I think maybe we could chat for a couple more minutes and then we'll have a bit of time for questions and answers. I mean, you've also really led me to my next kind of thematic interest, which was the future. I mean, you're thinking about how all this work looks right now in the present and in the very violent, traumatic, catastrophic present. But I know, certainly from the book and also from hearing you speak, your mind is both here and there in terms of time. And I was thinking about two things, really. The concept of what we do with loss. So you've just talked about not, I think, kind of reflecting on Mandela, not responding to loss with more loss, with not wanting revenge in terms of violence. I'm going to quote you one more time. I pray that and this was about the Samaris Hotel and the Park Hotel Netanya, which happened, was it 54 years? I didn't write that down, 54 years apart. And they were connected by one man who lost his family in the first terrorist attack, then trained the terrorists in the second attack. And there was a plaque that you would like to be put up there. And it reads, I pray that all the families who lost their loved ones in both attacks can find the courage to honour the memories of their loved ones by turning away from revenge and embracing life. May the memories of all be a blessing for peace. And actually, Rachel Goldberg-Polin said about Hirsch, at the Levi, I believe, may his memory be a revolution. I remember that right. You quote that in the book as well, actually. But there's something about that. There's something about looking to the future with very different eyes rather than reaction, response, and how that might work. What are your thoughts about? I know it's hard in the present to think about the future, but I think a lot of your book does tend towards the future, and you write 2 letters. Yeah, perhaps we'll start with that. Why don't you tell everyone about those 2 letters that you've written, and maybe we can think about your ideas.
Yeah. So one of the things I often think about is, what do children need to know in order to live in peace? And often in education teaches them, mathematics and English and science and all of these topics, but there isn't a curriculum for peace. And schools here obviously do not teach that for various reasons. And so one of the things I do which is, it's not really a lesson, it's more a letter. And I know no one writes letters anymore, but I'm a bit old school, so I just decided to do it in the form of a letter, is I write, it's a very short chapter. It's one letter to a Palestinian child and one to an Israeli child. They're both 16 years old. The names are fictitious, but they're based on people that I know in Kids for Peace. And I've actually had kids from Kids for Peace read both letters and give me feedback to them. And what I try and do in the letters is I try and imagine, if I was your parent, what would I want to tell you when you're 16 that would enable you to both feel proud of your Palestinian or Israeli identity, that would acknowledge the fears that you have of the other and acknowledge the horror of the current moment we're living in, and give you the tools to share this land in peace. And the chapter's only 10 pages, but it took me the longest to write of every chapter. I think I went through about 40 drafts, because every single word I changed back and forth, multiple times till I could find a way to write it in a way that could speak to these kids. And I feel like that chapter it's like the whole book in 10 pages really, but it's really my attempt to show you what I mean by peace. And again, my vision for peace may be not necessarily your vision for peace, but I think sometimes putting it in writing is more important than just saying, because peace can sound like a 3-word slogan, in the same way that bring them home is a slogan, and biyachad nenatzeach is a slogan, and all of these sorts of things. And I guess what I'm trying to do is to take those 3-word slogans and actually give you concrete examples of what they look like.
And I cannot highly recommend. I mean, I'm here for this, but I really cannot recommend highly enough the book. And actually, there were several moments. I'm not one for crying too much when I read. I like a book that makes me laugh out loud.
Yes.
But this one, did bring me to tears a few times. It's incredibly poignant. It's very painful, actually, a lot of the book. But I think also it's very hopeful. So I'm going to end here, and I'm just going to say, I think I felt that what you do work-wise, and certainly where I'm coming from in terms of peace building, this line very much resonated with me in a hopeful way, which was, we can't fight ideology with force, we fight ideology with alternative ideology. And I just think that that's an argument in which I can believe, and also for which I hope, or to which I can contribute. And I feel that that's exactly where you are contributing. So firstly, thank you very much. Secondly, Tamra, I'd like to open the floor, as it were, to questions.
So, David Wyman, what would you like to ask?
First of all, kol hakavod, Ittay. Sometimes since we met, I don't know whether you remember me, but we had a meeting on Shalom.
To your house.
Yeah, and congratulations on the book. I do want to read it. I just want to make a quick remark and then a tough question. First remark is, you raise the issue of change, and you say people can change, and I'm very much a strong believer in that. There is a certain tendency to say Arabs and Jews will always be this way, and they never can change. I think history shows that you are right, even in the conflict and the problems we have in our part of the world. The question I have is a tough one. I'm very disturbed by the fact that through all this war, there's been so little empathy for the state of the Gazans within the Israeli community, whether it's in the secular or religious community. I have my answers to that, but I was just wondering whether you have any thoughts on what has been really, in my opinion, a terrible situation.
Yeah, so I don't know if you know this, especially in our neighborhood, because David and I live in the same neighborhood. Last week, there was an ad that was put on an Egged bus, and it said in Hebrew, Yeled hu Yeled, lechemla en gvul, which means a child is a child, compassion has no borders, Israelis mourn all sides. And about 2 days after that ad was put on an Egged bus, it was taken down. And the reason Egged took that ad down was because a right-wing group called Betzalel had said this is going to hurt the feelings of IDF soldiers who are serving in Gaza that may have to ride this bus and they can't be forced to see this sign. Now, think about it. The sign doesn't say Gaza, doesn't say Palestinian, doesn't have any pictures, doesn't mention the war even. It just says literally in big letters, a child is a child is a child. And even that, 660 days can't be displayed on an Egged bus in Jerusalem. And so, empathy I hate the word weaponized, but it's a part of the conflict. And there's a lot of people that feel that empathy is a sign of weakness, and that empathy will make you lose. It exists on the Palestinian side as well. After that video came out of Eviatar David digging his own grave, I didn't see many Palestinians expressing remorse or sadness or pain about Hamas making him do that or filming that, because he deserves it, and there was various rationalizations about that. But I think I don't think we can end this war unless we end the war on empathy. And I think in the Israeli media there are some media channels like Haaretz and 972 Mag that have tried to do that, but the mainstream channels, Kan, 13, 14, and 12, they're not really showing us what happens in Gaza. Not like you would see in the UK, definitely. I think that's contributed to the war continuing for the length of time that it has. We spoke about dehumanization. I just want to talk about humanization. So, when the 251 hostages were taken, none of them were famous. None of them had any public profile. No one knew who they were. And now when you think of people like Noah Gamani and Emily Damari and Romi Gonen, they're like household names. Like they're known more than most celebrities in Israel. They all have hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram. They're on TV all the time. They've been humanized to the extent that even people who don't want a hostage deal at all want a hostage deal because they love them. And they have this incredible voice in Israeli society because they've been humanized more than any other Israeli I remember in history. Their pictures are all over the place. They're on buses. They're in Jewish communities around the world. Eli Sharabi's book sold 20,000 copies in a week. He's spoken in the UK, even in Australia now. And then I think people like, Miss Rachel has done that for Palestinians as well, and, brought Palestinian children's stories around the world in a way that shows, their suffering, their resilience and their hope. And so humanization has an incredibly potent role in changing people's political views as much as dehumanization does as well. Like they're two ends of the spectrum, and both of them have been very prevalent by one side or another throughout this war.
I think my question is kind of asking for advice. I'm kind of. I do want to speak my views though, because I'm very hurt by what's happening. It really sits terribly with me, and especially being Jewish, I feel somewhat this is being done in my name, and but it's not, and I don't know. I'm not sure how to proceed without to make my views known without hurting anyone, especially those who are feeling already persecuted.
Thanks, Martina. It's definitely a question I get asked often. I think, I'll start with just social media because you referred to people writing sort of posts online. When I see a post online that I disagree with, there's three questions I ask myself. The first is, why did this person post this? And I sort of make my own judgments. Maybe they're trying to convince people. Maybe they're trying to convince themselves. Maybe it's out of rage. Maybe it's out of trauma. But I always try to think of, no one posts something for no reason, even if they just shared it and they didn't write it themselves. So I try to think of what's the reason they posted it. And then I think once I decide what the reason is, I think, does this person want to post this because they want me to know it? Or does this person want a conversation? And then the third thing is, if I decide that the person wants a conversation, I think, does the person want a conversation with me? And if I can answer yes to all three questions, then I'll engage. If the answer is no, then I'll just leave it and, move on to the next post. But sometimes when I see a post and it's phrased as a question, or it's phrased as, look, I've heard this, but that doesn't sound right to me. What do you think? I'll engage with those. And when I see posts that don't, then I let them be. And I understand that people are angry or frustrated, and that's why they've written what they've written. The second point I'll make is that the worst place in the world to have an honest and meaningful conversation with someone is online. The best place to do it is in your living room. And I feel like when I do have disagreements with people, I often call them up on the phone first. I don't message them. I talk to them, and then I try and invite them to a cafe. Or it's often better in a living room because it's a lot more of an intimate space. And I share why someone said something that hurt me, or if I hurt someone else, I ask them to explain why that was. But it's that what Jonathan Sachs talks about, the dignity of difference, and also the ability to dialogue, which again, a lot of people don't know how to do. And it's not hard. It's not pleasant to sit next to someone you love and have them tell you why you're rubbish, or why your views are rubbish. But if you care about your relationship with them, especially if it's, your employer or your child or someone that you went to school with, and you want to invest in that relationship, then you have those difficult conversations. I'll just add one other thing, which is, because I'm a history teacher, I often think of how will history remember this moment. And when we look at other conflicts or wars, most of them happened when social media didn't exist. So I don't know what every person thought in the 1940s about World War II, or what everyone thought about the Vietnam War, because I don't have access to their innermost thoughts live streamed on a daily basis. But in this war, I do. I know exactly what every Israeli and Palestinian did. I know whether they bought a new cat, or had a birthday party, or went to a wedding, or didn't go to a wedding, or wore a torn shirt, or wore a sticker on their shirt with the days that I have the historians of the future have a minefield to research the views and attitudes of what people are today. And so sometimes I write something and I think this might not convince anyone, but I just want some historian one day in 30, 40 years who's researching, the views of peacemakers during this war to have something that I wrote today. So I know that's weird that I'm writing for some historian that I didn't meet in 30 or 40 years, but sometimes that's my target audience. And to be honest, that's sometimes my audience in my book as well.
Okay, thank you. Next question, and then I'm going to come back to my question about hope, and we'll wrap up. So Adrienne?
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's so much to think about, really, but I suppose what I wanted to, it sort of moved on from Martina in a way. I also feel that the challenge is, it just feels very different this time round, and the challenge is also even personally difficult to have dialogue within families when we have quite diametrically different views. From, one member of my family coming from a kibbutz background, who knows people that have been affected, with another member of my family who's very religious, another member who's not religious. And so those have so much tensions and complications. So I feel the challenge for me, actually, yes, there's lots of challenges like social media, but actually having dialogue without hurting people within our community is complicated. Or how do you even say, in a religious setting, of which I have one, I actually feel sad that it is beautiful to say the prayers for the hostages, but I'm not saying any prayers for the people in Gaza at the moment.
Yeah, look, I understand that completely. And I think it goes back to the first question I was asked tonight about trouble the comfortable and comfort the troubled. So, sometimes with our loved ones, especially people we've known our whole lives, when they have problems, we want to comfort them. We want to tell them this will be okay and don't worry about that person. You don't need them in your life, or end that relationship, or whatever advice or empathy we want to show to them in their life situation. But sometimes these conversations, especially about Gaza, and especially for Jews at a time where showing empathy to Gaza might be seen to be given fuel for anti-Semitism. I don't agree with that, but I know a lot of people see it that way. It is going to be very uncomfortable, and it's a muscle. It's in the same way that If you want to play tennis, you have to do training for it. If you want to run a marathon, you have to train for it. So you have to train before you do dialogue. And there's a lot of tips in my book on how to do that. But something takes years and years to learn, and even I get it wrong myself, even though I teach it. So it's not an easy art to do dialogue. But if you want to hold on to relationships with people that are different from you, then it's a muscle you need to work on.
Is there room for hope?
So, my friend Maozi Non, who lost both of his parents on October 7th, they were the first two victims killed in their kibbutz on October 7th. He says this line when he talks about peace, which is that hope is an action. So if you just feel hope, it can dissipate very quickly and you may not feel it at all. So the best way to feel hope is to do something. So for me, I think of what's the kind of future I want and what can I do now to be a part of that future. So for example, I'm learning Arabic at the moment. For me, that's an action that inspires hope because it says, I want to live in a country where I can speak the language of my neighbors. I currently speak Arabic very badly. I should learn Arabic better. So I build hope by learning Arabic. For someone else, hope could be reading a point of view that's not your own point of view, or maybe inviting, if you're Jewish, inviting someone Muslim to your house for dinner, or going to a mosque to meet a Muslim person, or it could be going to a peace vigil, or it could be signing a petition or going to a demonstration. Everyone, I'm not going to be prescriptive, but everyone has actions they can do that build hope. And on their own, all of these actions are nothing. They're like throwing teaspoons at a fire, teaspoons of water at a fire. They're very infinitesimal, but together, cumulatively, a lot of small actions is what ultimately causes change. The change that I want to see, and I'll name it, is I want the destruction and the bombing of Gaza to stop. I want food to be allowed to go into Gaza. I don't want to see any more people displaced from their homes. I want to see the Israeli hostages come home. I want to see the Israeli soldiers come home. And I want to see a Truth and Reconciliation Commission here that makes sure that we never, ever again see the horror that we've seen over the last 2 years. I believe that's possible. I believe that every person in the world has something they can do to make that happen. I think Israelis and Palestinians have the most to do to make that happen. I think that's what we're trying to do in Kids for Peace. It's why I wrote this book. And I hope through all of these actions that one day the very crazy and naive and delusional dreams that I have will become a reality.